Good morning, everybody. It's Tom Klein. Thanks for joining me for Dealers Trifecta. Don't bet the dealerships. I'm going to give you a mini session today on exactly what's going to happen at Digital Dealer. First, we're going to talk about risk, which is a continuous process. First, at the dealership, you have to assess the risk. What are you willing to absorb in terms of the risk? What is your risk appetite? And then what can we do at the dealership to transfer that risk to a third party? Or could we put in policies and procedures in order to transfer the risk on a daily basis? Can we put something in so that all the employees, by following a certain policy or a certain procedure, that's how we're doing it? And then you analyze the residual risk. And this is the continuous process in risk. When you talk about risk at a dealership, you're really talking about three different things. I call this the three legs of the stool. The first is dispute resolution. So that's everything from making sure your online reputation is being handled properly, all the way through lawsuits and class actions. And on those, are you, for example, are you transferring the risk to your insurance company? Do you have insurance coverage? That's the risk transference piece at the bottom of this slide. But dispute resolution is the first thing. It's the first way to prevent problems at a dealership. This is you if you're taking on dispute resolution. Your office is now the Office of Mayhem Evaluation. At a dealership, risk starts on two legs. You either have employees or you have customers. That's how risk starts. Really, there are three different ways that I have seen that risk transfers into bigger problems. Number one is customer problems. Number two is employee problems. And number three is advertising problems. And when we're talking about the three legs of the stool, that's usually how these starts. It really doesn't matter whether it's compliance or risk transference. And just to go back to this for a second, the three legs of the stool, we talked about dispute resolution. The second is compliance. So are you complying with all of the rules that are necessary? And there are a myriad of them. And that's a topic really for a little bit later, but that in and of itself could be a whole seminar. And then risk transference, which is, do you have insurance for various things? And are you looking, have you analyzed your insurance policies to make sure that if you do have a problem, that it would be covered under insurance? Now, where do complaints come from? They come from everywhere, but sometimes they come from direct correspondence. A lot of times they come from internet reviews. I see a lot of dealerships having a problem because they don't handle their internet reviews properly, and unanswered internet reviews really do become lawsuits and regulatory problems. They go to the FTC, they go to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they go to the attorneys general, all of those places. Then you've got service complaints. The regulators sometimes come directly to you. And then stealth customers, what I call stealth customers, which is you really don't know that they're a problem until all of a sudden they're on your desk, and then you have to deal with the problem. There's an expression in the claims business and the loss control: you manage what you monitor. You manage what you monitor. So if you're not working on these things, then for certain you are not managing them. So we're now going to jump into the 36 different websites that you should be monitoring on a daily basis. I advocate the Google, Facebook, Yelp, Reputation.com, PISC Consumer, My 3 Cents, Ripoff Report, and Dealer Rater, that somebody monitor those daily. You could have a receptionist who's got a little bit of extra time, is oftentimes what works well in a dealership. And you have he or she send you the reviews every day, whether they're good or bad. And there are certain ways to respond to reviews, and we're going to talk about that just a little bit. The rest of these, you should check at least monthly. I especially think Glassdoor, you should pay particular attention to. If you don't know Glassdoor, that is a site where employees will go on and rate their employer. So it's super important that you pay attention to that particular one, because as we talked about earlier, where problems come from primarily is consumers and then employees. So monitoring your Glassdoor and seeing what the employees are saying is really important. This is an example of a bad review, and I'm not going to go through the whole review with you, but you can see my husband and I had extremely terrible service. The dealer initially responds by saying, "Hey, I'm so sorry to hear this. We're reading this now, and we're going to check and see what went wrong. This is unfortunate. It seems out of character. Thanks for letting us know," which is perfectly fine. Then they follow up with this, which is certainly how not to do it. "Thank you for your lengthy review." That's like saying, I'm really not happy that you wrote this lengthy review. It's very defensive. The fact that you waited for 2.5 hours is factually incorrect. You're calling the customer a liar on the internet. Not a good way to go. Again, it says you did not wait for 2.5 hours for financing, as you stated. Then they go on and say that this situation, Logan and Randy made it clear that this estimate depended heavily on the accuracy of your financial assessment. That's like calling the consumer a liar. Actually, it's not like calling them a liar. It is calling them a liar. So you're going to escalate the customer by posting this stuff. You're not solving any problems. And the people who are reading these reviews are going to see right through and see that you're calling the customer a liar, which isn't going to go well for you in the long run. This is not how you want to resolve problems, because people who are reading these reviews are your next customers. This is not something you would want them to read. I know it sounds like you want them to see that your customer is lying on the internet, but it really never goes well. And then at the end, he says, "I would really be appreciative if you would opt to amend this to review to reflect what transpired here more accurately." The chances of the customer doing this are zero. They are absolutely not going to do this. And you're baiting the customer here to go to someone else, or go to a regulator, to go and write more reviews. Oftentimes I see what happens here is that you're pushing the customer so hard that they go to other websites and post the same review over and over and over. I call those serial posters. Here's another example. This one came from Facebook. "Do not deal with this dealership. They'll screw you out of your hard-earned money." The dealership in its response, first of all, says, "I'm sorry you feel that way." When you say, "I'm sorry you feel that way," that the customer knows it's insincere. They know that you don't mean it. And it's really a attempted platitude to calm the customer down. But again, people who read these things see right through that. This dealer talks about the fact that the deposit was non-refundable. In this particular state, non-refundable deposits were against the law, so they were essentially posting online that they were violating the law. Really a super big mistake. Again, they talk about the non-refundable deposit, and then they talk about, "So you reneged on your written agreement." Again, calling the customer a liar. Then at the bottom of this particular post, the dealership posted the customer's signature. And I circled here where it's non-refundable, but they posted the signature, which is just terrible. It's just, you can imagine how upset you would be if someone posted your signature online. So we need to do a paradigm shift at the dealership. Oftentimes, whoever is in charge of taking care of these customers is concerned with who's right. And it really doesn't matter who's right. They get caught up with, we did nothing wrong. This is really a trap. If it's on the internet, you have to fix it. What you have to do is you have to get the customer to come back into the dealership. You fix the problem, and then you ask the customer to update the review. If you ask them to change the review, they're going to feel manipulated. They're going to feel like you really don't care about them, and the only reason you fixed the problem is because you wanted them to change the review online. However, if you bring them back in, if you bring them in, get the problem solved, and then ask them to update their review, you say, hey, we're not such bad guys after all. We really do care about our customers, and I'd appreciate it if you would please update your review to reflect that we're not such bad guys. 70–80% of the time they will. And when customers read those, potential new customers read those, they see that you are trying to help. Nobody expects the dealership to be perfect, but they do want to see whether you're trying. And that's a great way to show that you're trying. We talked about this briefly earlier. Loss control. Your first loss is your best loss. And what that means, again, is that if you are trying to resolve a problem, the early money, the very early and the earliest you can fix the problem is going to cost you the least amount of money. Back to our three-legged stool for a minute. We talked about dispute resolution. Now we're going to talk about compliance. And remember, if you're not doing any one of these three things, dispute resolution, compliance, and risk transference, your three-legged stool here is going to fall over. Compliance. Chapter 8 of the U.S. Sentencing Criminal Code uses two factors to mitigate punishment. So in other words, when a judge is considering if you or your company has violated a law, one of the factors they use to mitigate the punishment is the existence of an effective compliance program. If that's not enough reason for you to have a robust compliance program, I don't know what is. It's right in the criminal code. We talked about the fact that problems start one of three ways: with consumers, with employees, or with advertising. Here we're going to talk about advertising for a second. Motor vehicle dealer boards have said, see dealer for details is vague and against consumer protection statutes. This is just a snippet of a dealer's website. And you can see down here, example 3, it says not available with special financing, lease, and some other offers. See dealer for details. Make sure that this isn't a tactic that you employ when you're advertising on the internet. On compliance here, there's on their price where it says the sales price, you can see it says $45,367. There's no asterisks. Because there's no asterisks, that means, according to the advertising laws, that the processing fee is included. This is potential class action exposure. You really have to look at the disclaimer and make sure it's very clear. If you use vague language, you really are going to have a problem. So remember to have an asterisk next to the sales price. In this particular case, they needed to use the word plus. I know this is hard to read, but the disclaimer is vague, and you need to make sure that that's not something that you have, because that is going to be a problem. The NADA advertising guide says it's reasonable to conclude that certain government-opposed fees, for example, taxes and licensing fees, may be excluded from the amount as long as it's clearly and conspicuously disclosed in the advertisement. Again, you have to have an asterisk there. So please check your website when you get back to the store and make sure that that's clear. Also, when you're talking about advertising, rebates and stacking rebates, if you stack rebates that a consumer cannot get. So in other words, if you put a first-time buyer with a military rebate and they can't get both, that's rebate stacking, and that's illegal. If they can, then great, no problem. Check your website for the word doc fee. In most cases, the states allow you to have a processing fee, but not a doc fee. Doc fee is old school language. Make sure your advertisements say plus taxes, tags, and processing fee. If you're posting payments on vehicles on the lot, make sure you have a disclaimer there. It has to say how much down, what the APR is, and what the length of time is on the car itself. That's considered an advertisement. If you paste a payment on a vehicle, that is considered an advertisement, and you have to disclose that properly. Also, make sure that if there was a damage to a new vehicle, that's disclosed. Every state is very different on that topic. Make sure that is disclosed when you sell the car. I wrote an article called The Lollipop One about a bait and switch situation when I went to buy a car. But in that particular case, the dealership was displaying factory photos, and they put an upgraded wheels and rims when the payment that was advertised was for a base model. So in this particular case, the bait and switch was the fact that the photos showed an upgrade, but the payment was actually the base model. If you don't have the vehicle on the lot, it's okay in the disclaimer to say available by factory order only. That's an okay thing to do. But if you're going to advertise it, you better have it on the lot. Also, really important is there's a disconnect often between the sales and the advertising. When was the last time you trained your salesman on that week's advertising? If you do a lot of TV advertising, this is really important, because if a customer sees a TV ad, the customer comes in and says, hey, I want this special on this vehicle, and the sales department doesn't know about it, that's when customers get upset. That's when they get pissed. And that's when they write reviews online. So there's often a disconnect between those two. Make sure that as you change your advertising, you're updating your sales department on what you're talking about. FTC buyer's guides. Are they on all your used vehicles? Are the proper boxes checked? Do you have them on demos? When the customer goes through F&I, are they filled out properly? Have you done an audit to take a look at that kind of thing? Also, if your business is conducted in another language, the FTC buyer's guide has to be in that other language. So make sure you take a look at that as well. In compliance, again, IRS 8300 compliance. Do you have a proper receipting procedure to make sure that when you pull a report through your DMS, that it's picking up what's cash? For example, traveler's checks of $10,000 even or less is considered cash. How are you receipting those in at the store? Are you receipting them in such a way that you can pull a report? Is your billing department checking each deal for $10,000 or more, whether you have to fill these in? This is a super important compliance item, and the penalties for non-compliance on IRS 8300 is $5.5 million and up to 5 years in jail. So when you go back to the store, check your rules and regulations on that. At the store, do you have a compliance management system as mandated by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? You're required to keep a copy of all of your consumer complaints and how they were resolved. Are you keeping up with this record-keeping mandate? The Home Solicitation Act. Are you physically going to customers' houses and selling them cars? This is a really tricky law, and lots of different dealers disagree on how to handle this. But in short, if you go to someone's home, sell them a product in their home, if you don't get them to sign a certain disclosure, they can come back even years later and give you the car back and ask you to reimburse them for all their payments. So check in with your lawyer on this. It's a very technical act, but it's something you have to pay attention to. Who's auditing your deals? Is anybody going back to take a look to make sure that you're in compliance? I use a 50-item checklist to make sure that everything's being done properly. But someone should be auditing your deals from time to time. It's an important part of a compliance management system. And now we're back to our three-legged stool, and we're going to talk about risk transference for a minute. And when you talk about risk transference, there's that old expression, you can pay me now or pay me later. When you get a claim, the best money is getting that claim resolved super early. As soon as you find out about it, that will be the least expensive. I have an expression that customer complaints, for example, are like rotten fish. The longer they go, the more they smell. They don't smell better as time goes on. So try to get those complaints resolved early. In risk transference, we're talking about the loss runs. Have you ever gone back and asked your insurance company to give you a loss run? Where are your losses coming from and how can you prevent them? Policies and procedures promote loss prevention. Use releases for customer issues. In other words, if you give the customer something, have them sign a release saying that you don't owe them any more money. Do you have a media policy at the dealership? If a local news station comes rolling in, do the employees know what to do with that camera crew when they start asking questions? We just talked about deal auditing. And do you have a policy for open recalls on used vehicles? These are all different ways to transfer the risk to make sure that everyone knows, so that when something happens, everyone knows what to do. I'm a big advocate in making sure you communicate all these things. Training. When you do training, do you have a sign-off sheet for the employees so that when a regulator comes in and says, hey, are you doing any training on your employees? You can go back and say, here's where we did this training and here's where we did this training. Really important for regulators, attorneys general, and those folks. Other policies and procedures. When was the last time you updated your employee guidebook? And does it have a legal rights agreement with the employees? Does it say if they have a dispute, how that's going to go? Do you mandate correction notices and termination forms? I often find that problems with employees happen because dealers aren't using correction notices. I believe in the 3-strike rule that you shouldn't terminate an employee unless they've been written up 3 times and acknowledged their mistakes. It really helps with cutting down on those problems. Also, do you have, for insurance products, do you have a personal umbrella if you were to get into an accident or someone were to sue you personally? Do you have an excess umbrella? Is there enough insurance to cover any loss to protect the dealership? I find that there are not enough coverage on most excess umbrellas. Do you have pollution in case of an oil spill or something like that? Do you have a cyber policy for potential ransomware issues? And do you have an employee practices policy for employee issues? Cyber policy, I'm just going to go through this real quickly. Cyber policies cover cryptojacking, data breaches, unauthorized access, typically pays for business interruption losses resulting from security breaches and data recovery costs. It pays for public relations and crisis management expenses. So if you've had a loss and it's gone into the media, the cyber insurance will pay for public relations so that you help quell the problem, right? Customers are going to be upset if their information is out in the public, if their personal information is out there. So cyber policies pay for legal expenses, and legal expenses related to regulatory penalties also pays for extortion losses. Again, here's some more things that typically that cyber policies pay for: funds transfer fraud, invoice manipulation. So if you pay something and you shouldn't have paid it, telephone fraud, often has rewards for criminal rewards, pays for computer hardware expenses, reputational losses. All these things are really important. So risk mitigation is a continuous improvement activity. So how can you unearth problems? How can you consider what if problems? What if this happens at the dealership? Are we covered? What if that happens at the dealership? How would we address those issues? So when you're thinking about risk mitigation at a dealership and how to protect, think about continuous improvement activity. Think about maintaining your compliance management system. Think about what the best practices are. All of these things will help you with risk mitigation. It is a continuous process. Excuse me. It's not something that you're just going to do one day, put on a shelf, and then not think about again. Risk mitigation at a dealership happens every day, or should happen every day, if you're protecting the assets of the dealership. So please consider that. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. My name is Tom Klein. I'm with Better Vantage Point, and I appreciate you coming out and spending just a few minutes with me. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for seeing things from a better vantage point.